The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the desolate California desert as Madeline Parker stumbled forward, her vision blurring and the world tilting dangerously around her. She'd been walking for hours after her horse had thrown her and galloped off with most of her supplies, leaving her alone in the unforgiving wilderness with only half a canteen of water that had long since run empty. The year was 1873, and Madeline was quickly learning that the promise of a new life in California could end before it even began. Sweat poured down her face, soaking the collar of her once pristine blue traveling dress. The heat was unlike anything she'd ever experienced in her 22 years of life back in Boston. It felt as though the desert itself was trying to bake her alive, drawing every last drop of moisture from her body. Her throat burned, her lips had cracked and begun to bleed, and the throbbing pain in her head intensified with each desperate step. "Just a little further," Madeline whispered to herself, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. But further to what? There was nothing but endless sand, scrub brush, and distant mountains that never seemed to get any closer. No town, no shelter, no salvation in sight. When her knees finally buckled beneath her, Madeline didn't even feel the impact of her body hitting the hot sand. The world faded to a hazy gray at the edges of her vision, and her last conscious thought was that no one would ever find her remains in this vast emptiness. No one would even know to look. Howard Nash spotted the crumpled blue form from nearly a quarter-mile away. In the flat desert terrain between San Andreas and the eastern mountains, anything breaking the monotony of sand and scrub caught the eye. At first, he thought it might be discarded clothing or perhaps a dead animal, but something made him guide his stallion, Copper, in that direction anyway. As he drew closer, his heart began to pound. It wasn't clothing or an animal, it was a woman, lying motionless on the baking desert floor. "Whoa, boy," he said, pulling Copper to a stop and dismounting in one fluid motion. The cowboy approached cautiously, his spurs jingling with each step. He'd been riding fence lines for the Broken Arrow Ranch since sunrise and had nearly completed his circuit when he'd spotted her. Howard knelt beside the woman, immediately recognizing the telltale signs of severe heatstroke. Her skin was flushed an alarming red, yet dry to the touch. Her body had stopped sweating, a dangerous sign. He pressed his fingers to her neck and felt a weak, rapid pulse. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, though he didn't expect a response. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow. Howard quickly assessed the situation. The nearest doctor was back in San Andreas, a good 3 hours' ride with a passenger. It was just past noon, the hottest part of the day, and moving her now across open desert might kill her. His canteen was still half full, but forcing water on an unconscious person could cause her to choke. Without hesitation, Howard removed his hat and placed it carefully over the woman's face to shield it from the sun. He then unbuttoned his denim jacket, slipped it off, and draped it over her upper body. The woman was petite, with delicate features partially obscured by dirt and sunburn. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and stuck to her damp forehead. "Copper, steady now," he murmured as he retrieved his bedroll from his saddle. He unfurled it next to the woman and gently lifted her onto it, providing at least a thin barrier between her body and the hot sand. But it wasn't enough. Looking up at the relentless sun, Howard made his decision. Sunset wouldn't come for at least 6 more hours, and she wouldn't last that long exposed to the elements. He positioned himself so that his shadow fell across her face and upper body, and then he settled in to wait. "You just hold on, miss," he said softly, dampening his bandana with a few precious drops from his canteen and placing it on her forehead. "I'll get you to safety, I promise." As the minutes stretched into hours, Howard maintained his vigilant position, shifting occasionally to ensure his shadow continued to shield her from the worst of the sun's rays. The desert heat seeped through his shirt, burning his back, but he didn't move. The woman's life depended on it. When her eyelids finally fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm, Howard felt a rush of relief so intense it nearly made him dizzy. "Water," she croaked, the word barely audible. Howard carefully raised her head, bringing his canteen to her cracked lips. "Small sips," he cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." She obeyed, taking tiny sips before collapsing back against his arm, utterly spent by even that small effort. "My name's Howard Nash," he said, his voice gentle. "I work at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Can you tell me yours?" Her eyes closed again, but she managed to whisper, Madeline Parker." "Well, Miss Parker, you've had a close call," he said, continuing to shield her with his body as the sun inched across the sky. "But you're going to be all right now. I'll see to that." As the shadows lengthened and the air finally began to cool, Howard prepared to move her. The woman Madeline had slipped in and out of consciousness throughout the afternoon, but her pulse was stronger now. He'd allowed her small sips of water whenever she was awake enough to swallow, and a hint of color had returned to her cheeks. Howard carefully gathered her into his arms and approached Copper, who stood patiently nearby. Getting an unconscious woman onto a horse was no simple task, but years of handling cattle and breaking horses had given Howard strength and ingenuity. He managed to situate her in the saddle, then mounted behind her, securing her slender form against his chest with one arm while he took the reins with his free hand. "Let's go home, Copper," he murmured, and the loyal stallion began the careful journey back to the Broken Arrow Ranch. Madeline drifted back to consciousness as the horse's steady gait rocked her against the solid warmth of the stranger's chest. The world had taken on a golden hue, and she realized that the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose. Her head still pounded, but the overwhelming sense of being baked alive had subsided. "You're awake," said a deep voice from behind her, the words rumbling through the chest she was leaned against. "How are you feeling, Miss Parker?" Madeline tried to answer but managed only a dry cough. The arm around her waist tightened slightly as the horse was brought to a halt, and then a canteen appeared before her. "More water," the voice instructed gently. "Small sips." This time the water tasted like the sweetest nectar she'd ever encountered. After a few careful swallows, her voice returned, raspy but functional. "Thank you," she managed. "You saved my life." "Just happened to be in the right place," the man replied, his tone modest. "I'm taking you to the ranch where I work. The housekeeper there, Mrs. Wilkins, has nursing experience. She'll know how to care for you properly." Madeline tried to turn to see her rescuer's face, but the movement sent pain shooting through her head. "I'm sorry," she said, settling back against him. "I don't even know what you look like." A low chuckle vibrated against her back. "Not much to look at, I'm afraid, just your average cowboy. We can make proper introductions once you're feeling better." As they rode, Madeline's memories of the day began to resurface. "My horse," she said suddenly. "He threw me, all my belongings." "We'll send some of the ranch hands out to look tomorrow," Howard assured her. "Horses usually don't go far in this territory. Too little water. Was it headed toward San Andreas?" "I think so," Madeline said, trying to orient herself. "I was on my way there when everything went wrong." Howard nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Mind if I ask what brings a lady like yourself to these parts? San Andreas isn't exactly known for its refinement." Despite her condition, Madeline felt a smile tug at her cracked lips. "Is my Boston accent that obvious?" "Clear as a bell," Howard confirmed, amusement warming his voice. I'm to be the new schoolteacher, Madeline explained. The town council sent for me. I have a letter of appointment in my satchel, which is currently attached to my runaway horse. Schoolteacher, huh? Well, the children of San Andreas are lucky to have you, assuming you still want the position after today's welcome. Madeline thought about it for a moment. I came west for a new beginning, she said finally. It would take more than one bad day to send me running back east. Spoken like a true frontier woman, Howard said, and she could hear the approval in his voice. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, a cluster of buildings came into view. The Broken Arrow Ranch was larger than Madeline had expected, with a main house, several outbuildings, a bunkhouse, and a substantial barn. Lanterns had been lit, their warm glow spilling out into the gathering dusk. "Howard Nash, where have you been?" called a woman's voice as they approached. A stout figure emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Supper's been ready for an hour," and she broke off, finally noticing Madeline. "Good heavens! What's happened?" "Found her collapsed in the desert, Mrs. Wilkins," Howard explained, bringing Copper to a stop. "Heatstroke, I reckon. She needs care." Mrs. Wilkins immediately transformed from irritated housekeeper to efficient nurse. "Bring her inside, quickly. I'll prepare a cool bath and some willow bark tea." She hurried back into the house, already calling for assistance. Howard dismounted first, then reached up to carefully lift Madeline from the saddle. She found herself cradled against his chest once again, finally able to see her rescuer's face in the lantern light. Howard Nash was not at all what she'd imagined. He wasn't much older than her, perhaps 26 or 27, with kind eyes the color of worn leather and a strong, square jaw shadowed with a day's growth of beard. His dark hair curled slightly where it had been flattened by his hat, and there was a smattering of freckles across his sunburned nose. He wasn't conventionally handsome in the way Boston men tried to be, but there was something compelling about his weathered face, something honest and steadfast. "I've got you," he assured her as he carried her toward the house. "You're safe now." And despite everything, the pain, the disorientation, the fact that she was in the arms of a complete stranger in a strange place, Madeline believed him. The next morning, Madeline awoke in an unfamiliar but comfortable bed. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting dappled patterns across a simple quilt. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the memories flooded back: the desert, the heat, the cowboy who had shielded her with his own body until sunset. She attempted to sit up, surprised to find that, while her head still ached, the overwhelming weakness had subsided. Someone had dressed her in a cotton nightgown that was slightly too large, and her hair had been neatly braided. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Wilkins's entrance. The housekeeper carried a tray with a steaming cup and a bowl of what smelled like porridge. "Ah, you're awake. How are you feeling this morning, Miss Parker?" "Much better, thank you," Madeline replied, her voice still raspy. "I can't thank you enough for your care." Mrs. Wilkins set the tray on the bedside table and helped Madeline sit up against the pillows. "It's Howard you should be thanking. That boy stayed with you for hours in that heat. His back is burned something fierce from the sun, though he won't admit it's bothering him." She clucked her tongue disapprovingly. Men and their pride. Madeline felt a pang of guilt. "He was burned because he was shading me, indeed. Refused to leave your side until he was sure you'd survive the journey back. Said moving you in the worst of the heat might kill you, so he just stayed put, using his own body to keep the sun off you." Mrs. Wilkins shook her head, but there was unmistakable fondness in her expression. "Never seen anything like it, and I've been at this ranch for 15 years. Madeline didn't know what to say. Such selflessness from a complete stranger was unexpected. Is "Is Mr. Nash here? I'd like to thank him properly." "He rode out at first light with some of the other hands to look for your horse and belongings," Mrs. Wilkins explained, handing Madeline the cup of tea. "Should be back by midday. In the meantime, you need to rest and get your strength back. Dr. Thompson from town will be by later to check on you." After breakfast, Mrs. Wilkins helped Madeline to a chair by the window, where she could look out at the ranch. It was a hive of activity, with cowboys moving between the corral, barn, and bunkhouse. In the distance, the desert stretched out, beautiful yet deadly in the morning light. It was hard to believe that just yesterday she had nearly died out there. "Mrs. Wilkins," Madeline asked as the housekeeper straightened the bed, "what kind of man is Howard Nash?" "I owe him my life, yet I know almost nothing about him." The older woman considered the question. "Howard's been with the Broken Arrow for about 5 years now, came west from Missouri after the war. He doesn't talk much about his past, but I gather he lost family in the fighting." She plumped a pillow with particular vigor. "He's the most reliable hand on this ranch, first to volunteer for the hard jobs, last to complain, never causes trouble. The other men respect him." "He's not married?" Madeline asked, then blushed at her own forwardness. Mrs. Wilkins gave her a knowing look. "No, he's not. Keeps mostly to himself, though half the unmarried girls in San Andreas have tried to catch his eye." She smiled slightly. "Not that he's noticed. That man wouldn't recognize a flirtation if it came with written instructions." Before Madeline could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the window. A group of riders was returning to the ranch, and her heart quickened when she recognized Howard's broad shoulders among them. More surprising was the sight of her own bay mare being led on a rope behind one of the other cowboys. "They found my horse," she exclaimed, relief flooding through her. Mrs. Wilkins joined her at the window. "So they did. That's Howard for you. When he makes a promise, he keeps it." Madeline watched as Howard dismounted, speaking briefly with the ranch hands before they dispersed. He looked up toward her window, as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met. Even from a distance, the intensity of the connection startled her. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, and she found herself raising a hand in response. "I should go down," Madeline said, suddenly eager to speak with him. "To thank him." "You'll do no such thing," Mrs. Wilkins insisted. "You're still recovering. He can come to you if he wants to talk." She guided Madeline back to bed. "Now rest. I'll send him up if he asks after you." Madeline reluctantly complied, though her thoughts remained with the cowboy who had risked his own safety to save a stranger in the desert. It wasn't until late afternoon that Howard finally appeared at her door, knocking softly before entering at her invitation. He'd clearly cleaned up, his dark hair still damp from washing, and he wore a fresh shirt that couldn't quite hide the stiff way he held his sunburned shoulders. "Miss Parker," he said, hat in hand. "Glad to see you're recovering." In the clear light of day, Madeline was struck again by his steady presence. Howard Nash wasn't a man who commanded attention when he entered a room, but there was something substantial about him, like bedrock beneath the surface. "Mr. Nash," she replied, sitting up straighter. "I understand I have you to thank for more than just my rescue. You found my horse." He nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Found her about 5 miles east of where you fell. She was grazing as peaceful as you please, all your belongings still intact." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, "including this, which I thought you might be anxious to have back, your teaching appointment." Madeline took the letter with grateful hands. "Thank you. Without this, I'd have had a hard time proving my identity to the town council." Howard shifted his weight, seeming uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "Mrs. Wilkins says the doctor believes you should rest another day or two before traveling to town." I've sent word to the council about your situation. They're making arrangements for your boarding house room to be prepared." "That's very thoughtful," Madeline said, touched by his consideration. Then, gathering her courage, she continued, "Mrs. Wilkins also told me about your sunburn, that you were burned while protecting me from the sun." Howard's ears reddened slightly, and he dismissed the concern with a shrug that he immediately seemed to regret. "It's nothing. Desert sun is harsh on everyone." "It's not nothing," Madeline insisted. "You saved my life, Mr. Nash. I don't know how I can ever repay such kindness." His eyes met hers directly. "No repayment necessary, Miss Parker. Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," she said softly. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Howard cleared his throat. "Well, I should let you rest. Is there anything you need? Anything I can bring you from town tomorrow?" Madeline shook her head. "Mrs. Wilkins has been very attentive, but perhaps you could visit again." "The hours pass slowly when one is confined to bed, and I'd like to hear more about San Andreas, since I'll be making it my home after all." The smile that spread across Howard's face transformed him, softening the weathered lines and brightening his eyes. "I'd be happy to, Miss Parker. Perhaps tomorrow evening after my duties are done." "I'll look forward to it," she replied, returning his smile. After he left, Madeline found herself staring at the door, replaying their conversation in her mind. There was something about Howard Nash that intrigued her, something beyond gratitude for her rescue. In Boston, she'd never lacked for suitors, but none had affected her the way this quiet cowboy did, with just a look or a simple gesture. "Don't be foolish," she chided herself. "You barely know the man, and you came west to be independent, not to lose your heart to the first kind face you encounter." But as she drifted off to sleep that night, it was Howard's face she saw, sun-bronzed and steadfast, watching over her in the desert heat. True to his word, Howard visited Madeline the following evening. He arrived bearing wildflowers he'd gathered on his way back to the ranch, presenting them with an almost boyish shyness that charmed her completely. "I thought these might brighten your room," he said, handing her the small bouquet of purple and yellow blooms. "They don't last long out here, just a few weeks after the spring rains, but they're pretty while they're around." Madeline accepted them with delight. "They're beautiful. I wouldn't have expected such delicate things to survive in the desert." "Desert's full of surprises," Howard replied, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Toughest-looking plants often have the most fragile blooms, softest hearts often behind the roughest exteriors." They talked for hours that evening. Howard told her about San Andreas, its history as a mining town that had reinvented itself as a trading hub for cattle ranchers after the gold played out. The mix of people who called it home, from old Mexican families to Chinese merchants to European immigrants. He described the dusty main street with its saloons and general store, the small church where services were held every Sunday, and the schoolhouse where she would soon be teaching. "It's not much," he admitted. "Just a one-room building with about 20 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years old. The last teacher left after getting married to a rancher from up north." "It sounds perfect," Madeline said sincerely. "In Boston, I was just one of dozens of teachers, all competing for recognition. Here I can make a real difference." Howard studied her thoughtfully. "What made you leave Boston?" "If you don't mind my asking, it's a long way to travel alone." Madeline hesitated, then decided on honesty. "After my parents died last year, influenza took them both within days of each other. I found myself at a crossroads. I could continue teaching at the same school, living in the same house, moving in the same social circles, or I could start fresh. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in California, it felt like a sign. "I'm sorry about your parents," Howard said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Thank you. It was difficult, but they loved each other so completely that I don't think either would have wanted to live long without the other." She smiled sadly. 25 years they were married, and not once did I ever doubt their devotion. I always hoped to find a love like theirs. Howard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "My own folks were the same way. Pa died at Gettysburg, and Ma followed less than a year later. Doctor called it pneumonia, but everyone knew she died of a broken heart." "You fought in the war?" Madeline asked gently. "Last year of it. I was young, just 18 when I enlisted. Saw things no man should see." He looked down at his hands, calloused and strong. "After it was over, I couldn't go back to Missouri. Too many ghosts, so I headed west, worked my way across the country until I landed here." Madeline could see the shadow of old pain in his eyes and instinctively reached out to touch his hand. "And now, has California been good to you?" The moment her fingers brushed his, something electric passed between them. Howard looked up, surprise and something deeper flickering across his face. "Better than I deserved," he said quietly, his gaze holding hers. "Especially these last few days." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then, from downstairs, Mrs. Wilkins's voice called out that supper was ready. Howard withdrew his hand reluctantly. "I should go. You need your rest, and I've taken enough of your time." "You haven't," Madeline assured him quickly. "Your company has been the highlight of my recovery." His smile returned, warming her more than any blanket could. "Well, in that case, perhaps I could visit again tomorrow. The doctor's coming to check on you in the morning, and if he approves, maybe we could take a short walk around the ranch grounds. Fresh air would do you good." "I'd like that very much," she replied. After he left, Madeline touched the wildflowers he had brought, arranging them carefully in the water glass Mrs. Wilkins had provided as a makeshift vase. Such a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes about the man who had thought to bring beauty to a sick room. For the first time since arriving in California, Madeline felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that perhaps this unexpected detour was exactly where her path was meant to lead. The doctor pronounced Madeline well enough for light activity the next morning, prescribing plenty of water and cautioning against overexertion in the heat. By afternoon, she was dressed in a borrowed skirt and shirtwaist that Mrs. Wilkins had altered to fit her smaller frame, her hair neatly pinned beneath a borrowed bonnet with a wide brim to shield her still sensitive skin from the sun. Howard was waiting for her on the front porch of the main house, his face lighting up when she appeared. "You look much improved, Miss Parker," he said, offering his arm. "Ready for that walk?" "More than ready," she replied, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. "I've been counting the minutes." He led her slowly around the ranch, careful to stay in shaded areas where possible and frequently asking if she needed to rest. The Broken Arrow was impressive in size and operation, with dozens of cowboys working the cattle, repairing equipment, and tending to the endless tasks required to keep such an enterprise running. "Who owns all this?" Madeline asked as they paused beneath a cottonwood tree near a small creek that ran behind the main house. "Jonah Thornton," Howard replied. "He started with just 20 acres and a handful of longhorns back in '49. Now he's got 15,000 acres and one of the largest herds in the county." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "He's up at his summer camp now, overseeing the high country grazing. Won't be back until fall roundup." They settled on a bench overlooking the water, the afternoon sun casting dappled shadows through the leaves above them. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle sound of the creek and distant cattle lowing. "I'll be leaving for San Andreas tomorrow," Madeline said finally. The doctor says I'm well enough to travel and the school term starts in less than a week. I need to prepare. Howard nodded, though she thought she detected disappointment in his expression. I'll drive you in the wagon. It's more comfortable than riding, especially after what you've been through. Thank you. Madeline hesitated, then added, I'll miss our conversations. Howard turned to face her directly, his eyes serious. San Andreas is only an hour's ride from here. I come into town at least once a week for supplies. He cleared his throat. What I mean to say is, this doesn't have to be goodbye, Miss Parker. If you're amenable, I'd like to call on you properly once you're settled. Madeline's heart quickened. Call on me. Yes, madam. A hint of color rose in his cheeks. I know we've only just met and under unusual circumstances at that, but I'd like the chance to know you better. In town. With your permission. A smile spread across Madeline's face, warm and genuine. I would like that very much, Mr. Nash. Howard, he corrected gently. If we're to be friends, you might as well use my given name. Howard, she repeated, liking the sound of it on her lips. And you must call me Madeline. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek she hadn't noticed before. Madeline it is. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a welcome respite from the heat that had nearly claimed Madeline's life days earlier. She found herself both eager and reluctant to leave the Broken Arrow, eager to begin her new position and life in San Andreas, but reluctant to leave the place where she'd come to know Howard. He was waiting with the wagon when she emerged from the house, her few recovered belongings packed in a small trunk. Mrs. Wilkins fussed over her, pressing a package of food for the journey into her hands and extracting a promise that Madeline would come back to visit soon. You take care of yourself in town, the housekeeper instructed firmly. And don't hesitate to send word if you need anything at all. Howard checks the post office every time he's in San Andreas. The journey to town passed too quickly for Madeline's liking. Howard pointed out landmarks along the way, telling her stories about the area and its history. He was a natural storyteller, painting vivid pictures with his words of the first settlers, the native peoples who had inhabited the land for generations, and the changes that had come with the gold rush and subsequent development. San Andreas itself was larger than Madeline had expected, not just a cluster of buildings around a dusty crossroads, but a proper town with several streets, a town square, and buildings of varying sizes and styles. The main street bustled with activity, horses and wagons moving alongside pedestrians, most of whom stopped to stare curiously as Howard's wagon passed. Word travels fast in small towns, Howard explained, noting her awareness of the attention. Everyone already knows the new schoolteacher is arriving today and that she had quite the adventure getting here. Wonderful, Madeline said with a nervous laugh. I'll be the talk of the town before I've even taught my first lesson. They'll love you, Howard assured her, guiding the horses toward a two-story building with a sign identifying it as Palmer House Boarding. Mrs. Palmer runs the cleanest, most respectable boarding house in town. Several unmarried businesswomen stay here. You'll be in good company. Mrs. Palmer proved to be a brisk, efficient widow in her 50s who welcomed Madeline warmly and showed her to a neat, sunny room on the second floor. Meals are served promptly at 7, noon, and 6, she informed Madeline. Laundry day is Tuesday. Bath night is Saturday unless you arrange otherwise. No gentlemen callers past 8 in the evening, and they must remain in the parlor at all times. Her eyes darted to Howard, who stood respectfully in the doorway with Madeline's trunk. Though I make exceptions for heroes, she added with a surprising twinkle. Mr. Nash's reputation is beyond reproach. After Howard had deposited the trunk and excused himself to see to the horses, Mrs. Palmer sat Madeline down for tea and a thorough briefing on San Andreas society. The town council chairman, Mr. Robertson, would be by in the morning to take her to the schoolhouse and introduce her to her duties. Sunday services at the church were an important social occasion, not to be missed. The general store had the best selection of goods, but the mercantile near the livery had better prices on certain items. "And what of the children I'll be teaching?" Madeline asked when Mrs. Palmer paused for breath. "What can you tell me about them?" "Oh, a mixed bunch, Mrs. Palmer replied, waving a hand. "The Cooper twins are bright as buttons but mischievous. Little Sarah Wilcox barely speaks above a whisper. Her mother died last winter. Poor thing. The Richardson boys will test your authority from the start, mark my words. And then there's Mei Lin Chen from the Chinese laundry, brilliant child, especially with numbers, but some parents have complained about her attendance." She sniffed disapprovingly. "Narrow-minded fools." Madeline filed away this information, already forming plans for her approach to each child. She had always believed that understanding a student's circumstances was the first step in effective teaching. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Howard had returned, hat in hand. "I've settled the horses at the livery," he reported. "And I've taken the liberty of arranging an account for you at the general store, Miss Parker. Mr. Biggs will extend credit until your first month's wages arrive." "That's very thoughtful," Madeline said, touched by his foresight. "Thank you." Howard shifted slightly, seeming reluctant to take his leave. "I should be getting back to the ranch, but perhaps. Would Sunday after church services be acceptable for that call I mentioned?" From the corner of her eye, Madeline could see Mrs. Palmer's eyebrows rising with interest. "Sunday would be perfect," she replied, ignoring the landlady's obvious curiosity. After Howard had gone, Mrs. Palmer didn't even try to hide her inquisitiveness. "Well, well," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "It seems your desert misadventure had a silver lining. Howard Nash hasn't called on a lady in all the years he's been in these parts." "We're merely friends," Madeline insisted, though the flutter in her stomach at the thought of seeing him again suggested otherwise. "He saved my life. I owe him my gratitude." "Gratitude doesn't bring that look to a woman's eyes," Mrs. Palmer observed shrewdly. "But don't worry, dear. Your secret is safe with me for now, at least, though nothing stays secret for long in San Andreas." The following days were a whirlwind of activity as Madeline prepared for the start of the school term. The schoolhouse was modest but sound, with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk on a small raised platform. Bookshelves lined one wall, though the selection was limited and many volumes showed significant wear. A large slate board dominated the front wall, and maps of the United States and California hung on either side. Mr. Robertson, the council chairman, provided her with the class roster and previous teachers' notes, outlined her duties and salary, and answered her questions with surprising thoroughness. "We're fortunate to have someone of your qualifications, Miss Parker," he said as they concluded their meeting. "The children of San Andreas deserve a proper education, especially now that the town is growing." Madeline spent hours organizing the schoolroom, planning lessons, and reviewing what her predecessor had covered. She also found time to explore the town, introducing herself to merchants and families whose children would be in her class. Most welcomed her warmly, though a few eyed the Eastern-educated newcomer with suspicion. By Sunday morning, she had begun to feel at home in San Andreas. She dressed carefully for church services, wearing her best blue dress and the locket that had belonged to her mother. The small white church was filled to capacity when she arrived, and heads turned as Mrs. Palmer escorted her to a pew near the front. The service was simpler than what Madeline was accustomed to in Boston, but the minister's sermon on community and welcome seemed particularly appropriate. As the congregation filed out afterward, many people approached to introduce themselves, creating a receiving line of sorts on the church steps. And then Howard was there, looking different than she'd ever seen him. Gone were the dusty work clothes and weathered hat. Instead, he wore a clean dark suit with a crisp white shirt and string tie. His hair was neatly combed and he'd trimmed his beard. The transformation was striking, highlighting his handsome features and strong build. "Miss Parker," he greeted her, taking her hand briefly. "You look lovely this morning." "Thank you, Mr. Nash," she replied, suddenly aware of the many eyes watching their interaction. "You're looking well yourself." A smile tugged at his lips, acknowledging the formality they'd both adopted in public. "I was hoping you might accompany me for a walk around the town square. The weather is fine, and you might enjoy seeing the bandstand where concerts are held during summer evenings." "I'd be delighted," Madeline agreed, taking his offered arm. As they strolled through the town square, Madeline was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed them. "I feel as though I'm on display," she murmured. Howard chuckled. "Welcome to small town life." "By supper time, half the town will be speculating about our intentions, and by morning there will be rumors of an engagement." "Oh dear," Madeline said, but found herself more amused than dismayed. "Should we be more discreet? Would you prefer that?" Howard asked, his tone suddenly serious. Madeline considered the question. In Boston, she would have been mortified by such public scrutiny of her personal affairs. But here in San Andreas, there was a certain freedom in the openness. No pretense, no elaborate social rituals, just honest interest, however nosy it might be. "No," she decided. "Let them talk. I have nothing to hide." Relief flickered across Howard's face. "Good, because I intend to call on you regularly, Miss Parker, and I'd rather not do so in secret." Their walk took them completely around the square, ending at a small cafe that Howard informed her served the best apple pie in 3 counties. Over slices of the promised pie and cups of strong coffee, they talked easily about Madeline's preparations for school, the latest news from the ranch, and their mutual love of reading. "The town has a small lending library," Howard told her. "It's just a room at the back of the newspaper office, but Mr. Fleming, the editor, is always happy to receive book donations. I've contributed a few over the years." "What do you like to read?" Madeline asked, curious about this unexpected facet of the cowboy. "History, mostly," Howard admitted. "And some poetry, though the fellows at the bunkhouse would never let me hear the end of it if they knew." Madeline smiled, charmed by this revelation. "Your secret is safe with me. Which poets do you favor?" "Wordsworth." "Whitman." "And I've recently discovered Tennyson." There was a hint of shyness in his confession that Madeline found utterly endearing. "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," she quoted softly. Howard's eyes met hers, warm with appreciation. "You know Tennyson?" "My father taught literature before he became a headmaster," Madeline explained. "Our home was filled with books. He believed that poetry spoke truths that ordinary language couldn't express." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Howard said. He was. Madeline felt the familiar pang of grief, but it was tempered now by fond remembrance rather than sharp pain. "He would have liked you, I think." The afternoon passed in pleasant conversation, and when Howard finally escorted Madeline back to the boarding house, they lingered on the porch, reluctant to part. "School begins tomorrow," Madeline said. "I confess I'm a bit nervous." "You'll be wonderful," Howard assured her. "Those children are lucky to have you as their teacher." His confidence bolstered her own. "Thank you for a lovely afternoon, Howard. When might I see you again?" "I'll be in town on Wednesday to deliver some papers for Mr. Thornton," he replied. "Perhaps I could call on you in the evening, after your school day is done." "I'll look forward to it," Madeline said, meaning every word. As she watched him walk away, his straight-backed figure cutting a distinguished silhouette against the setting sun, Madeline acknowledged the truth she'd been dancing around for days. She was falling for Howard Nash, the cowboy who had shaded her body with his own until sunset, and who continued to shine light into her life with each passing day. Madeline's first weeks as San Andreas's schoolteacher passed in a blur of activity. Her 22 students, ranging from shy 6-year-old Sarah Wilcox to lanky 16-year-old James Richardson, presented a variety of challenges and rewards. Some, like Mei Lin Chen, absorbed knowledge with an almost desperate hunger. Others, particularly the Richardson boys, tested her authority at every turn. But Madeline discovered she had a natural talent for classroom management, combining firm discipline with genuine affection in a way that gradually won over even the most reluctant pupils. By the end of the third week, even James Richardson was participating in discussions, his initial sullenness giving way to grudging respect when Madeline demonstrated knowledge of cattle breeding that surprised the rancher's son. "My uncle raised cattle in Massachusetts," she explained when James questioned how a city woman knew about bloodlines. "Different breeds than you have here, but the principles are the same. I spent summers helping on his farm." This revelation elevated her standing among the ranch children considerably. No longer just a fancy Eastern lady, Madeline became someone who might actually understand their lives and concerns. Throughout these busy weeks, Howard remained a steady presence. True to his word, he called on Madeline whenever his duties brought him to town, usually once or twice a week. Sometimes they simply walked around the square or sat on the boarding house porch, talking about their days. Other times, he escorted her to community events, a box social to raise money for the church roof, a musical performance by traveling singers, a Saturday night dance at the town hall. On one memorable occasion, Howard took her riding into the hills surrounding San Andreas, showing her vistas of breathtaking beauty that couldn't be seen from the town or main roads. They picnicked beside a small lake, hidden among pines, where the water was so clear that Madeline could count the pebbles on the bottom near the shore. "I never knew such places existed," she admitted, gazing out at the tranquil scene. "In Boston, nature is something cultivated in parks and gardens. This is something else entirely." Howard nodded, understanding. "First time I saw the Sierra Nevada, I felt like I'd discovered a secret world. Made me think maybe God created beauty like this just so we could stumble upon it and be reminded of what matters." "And what matters?" Madeline asked softly. Howard's eyes met hers, serious and intent. "That there are wonders in this world greater than anything man could build. That there are moments worth enduring all manner of hardship to experience." His voice lowered. "That there are people worth riding through deserts to find, even if you didn't know you were looking." Madeline's breath caught at the naked emotion in his gaze. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as gratitude and friendship had blossomed into something much deeper and more profound. "Howard," she began, his name a whisper on her lips, but whatever she might have said was interrupted by a distant rumble of thunder. Howard glanced up at the darkening sky with a frown. "Storm's coming in faster than I expected. We should head back." They barely made it to town before the heavens opened, arriving at the boarding house soaked despite their hurried ride. Mrs. Palmer clucked disapprovingly at their bedraggled state, but provided towels and hot tea without further comment. As Howard prepared to leave, he paused at the parlor door. "Madeline," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "what you were about to say at the lake. I hope we can continue that conversation soon." She nodded, her cheeks warm despite her damp clothes. "Very soon." The following Sunday, Howard didn't appear at church. Madeline tried to hide her disappointment as she sat through the service, her eyes frequently drifting to the door in hopes of seeing his tall figure slip in late. When he still hadn't appeared by the final hymn, she resigned herself to a Sunday without his company. As the congregation dispersed, however, Mrs. Wilkins from the Broken Arrow approached her with a folded note. "From Howard," the housekeeper explained. "He couldn't get away. One of the hands was injured yesterday, and Howard's covering his duties." Madeline thanked her and waited until she had privacy to read the note. Howard's handwriting was strong and clear, much like the man himself. "Madeline, I regret that ranch duties prevent me from seeing you today. Ben Miller broke his leg when his horse stepped in a gopher hole, and I've taken over his watch on the North Range until a replacement can be arranged. I had looked forward to our time together more than I can express. If your schedule permits, I would be honored if you would join me for supper at the hotel dining room this coming Saturday evening. There is something important I wish to discuss with you. Until then, I remain yours, Howard." The formal wording couldn't disguise the warmth behind the message, and the signature, "yours," sent a flutter through Madeline's heart. What might the something important be? She allowed herself to hope, even as she cautioned against reading too much into a simple dinner invitation. The week crawled by at an agonizing pace. Madeline threw herself into her teaching with renewed vigor, extending the school day with special sessions for students who needed extra help or wanted advanced instruction. She reorganized the meager school library, wrote to her former colleagues in Boston requesting book donations, and began planning a school exhibition for the end of the term. By Saturday, Mrs. Palmer had observed Madeline's nervous energy with knowing eyes. "Special evening ahead?" she inquired as Madeline selected her best dress, a deep green silk that she had saved for important occasions. "Just dinner at the hotel with Mr. Nash," Madeline replied, aiming for casualness and failing utterly. Mrs. Palmer smiled. "The whole town's been watching you too, you know. There's a wager at Donovan's saloon about when he'll propose." Madeline's cheeks flamed. "Mrs. Palmer, surely people have better things to discuss than my personal affairs." "Not in a town this size, they don't," the landlady said with a laugh. "But if it helps, most folks approve. Howard Nash is well respected, and you've proven yourself a dedicated teacher. The two of you make a fine match, in my opinion." Despite her embarrassment, Madeline felt a glow of pleasure at the older woman's words. She had come to value the opinions of her new community, and the idea that they might support a union between her and Howard was comforting. Howard arrived promptly at 7, wearing the same suit he had worn to church, but with the addition of a new waistcoat. He presented Madeline with a small bouquet of wild roses, their delicate fragrance filling the boarding house parlor. "You look beautiful," he said, his admiration evident in his gaze. "Thank you," Madeline replied, suddenly shy despite the months of growing closeness between them. "These are lovely." She handed the flowers to Mrs. Palmer, who promised to put them in water. The hotel dining room was the most elegant establishment in San Andreas, which wasn't saying much compared to Boston standards. But the crisp white tablecloths, polished silverware, and attentive service created an atmosphere of special occasion. Howard had reserved a table by the window, somewhat removed from the other diners, affording them a measure of privacy. They made small talk through the first course, a surprisingly good potato soup, discussing the week's events and exchanging news. Howard told her about Ben Miller's recovery and the latest letter from Mr. Thornton, who would be returning to the ranch earlier than expected due to trouble with rustlers in the high country. As their main course arrived, roast beef with vegetables for Howard, chicken for Madeline, a comfortable lull fell in their conversation. Howard seemed to gather himself, setting down his fork and meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her heart race. "Madeline," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion visible on his face, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. When I found you in that desert, I had no idea that I was also finding the woman who would change everything for me." Madeline's breath caught, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I know it hasn't been very long," Howard acknowledged, "and perhaps this is too soon, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, placing it on the table between them. "I love you, Madeline Parker. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had hoped that this might be his important topic, the reality of his proposal still sent a wave of emotion crashing through her. Tears sprang to her eyes as she looked at the earnest face of the man across from her, the man who had not only saved her life, but had filled it with joy and meaning beyond anything she had experienced before. "Howard," she managed, her voice thick with feeling. "I came west seeking a new beginning, never imagining that I would find not just a new life but a new heart. You've taught me what real strength and kindness look like." She reached across the table to take his hand. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Howard's face was like sunrise over the desert, warm and brilliant and full of promise. He opened the box to reveal a ring with a small but perfect diamond flanked by tiny pearls in a gold setting. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "I've carried it with me since I left Missouri, waiting for the right woman to wear it." The ring fit as though it had been made for her, and Madeline found herself overcome with emotion once again. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll cherish it always." Only then did she become aware of the silence that had fallen over the dining room. Looking up, she realized that every other diner was watching them, expressions ranging from open delight to knowing satisfaction. When Howard raised her hand to his lips and kissed it just above the ring, a spontaneous round of applause broke out. "I told you nothing stays secret in San Andreas," Howard said with a rueful laugh. Madeline found she didn't mind the audience. Their moment felt right to share with the community that would be their home. "Let them celebrate with us," she replied. "After all, they've had a stake in this from the beginning, apparently." Word of their engagement spread through San Andreas by morning, and Madeline's students greeted her on Monday with excited questions and congratulations. Even James Richardson offered a gruff, "Mr. Nash is a good man, madam," that Madeline recognized as high praise from the teenager. The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. With the school term ending in June, Madeline and Howard decided on a July wedding, giving them time to prepare but not prolonging their engagement unnecessarily. Mrs. Palmer insisted on hosting a small engagement party at the boarding house, where Howard formally asked Mr. Robertson, as the town council chairman, for Madeline's hand, a gesture that, while technically unnecessary since Madeline had no male relatives present, demonstrated Howard's respect for both his fiancée and the community. The only shadow on their happiness was the question of where they would live after marriage. Howard's position at the Broken Arrow included lodging in the bunkhouse, while Madeline's room at the boarding house was similarly tied to her unmarried status. Neither arrangement would accommodate a married couple. "We could rent the Dawson place," Howard suggested one evening as they discussed their options. Old man Dawson moved to Sacramento to live with his daughter last year, and the house has been empty since. "It's small but sound and only a mile from town. Would you be able to continue working at the Broken Arrow?" Madeline asked, concerned. "It's quite a distance for daily travel." Howard hesitated, then revealed the plan he'd been considering. "I've been thinking about making a change, actually. Mr. Fleming at the newspaper has mentioned needing help. The printing business interests me, and the hours would be more regular than ranch work." "But you love the ranch," Madeline said, surprised. "I wouldn't want you to give that up for me." "I love you more," Howard said simply. "And it's not just for you, it's for us. For the family we might have someday. Ranch work is hard on a marriage with the long hours and frequent absences. I've seen good men lose their wives to loneliness." He took her hand. "I don't want that for us." Madeline was touched by his thoughtfulness, but still uncertain. "Is newspaper work what you truly want? I don't want you to resent the change later." "I won't," Howard assured her. "I've always enjoyed writing, and Mr. Fleming has said he'd teach me the printing trade. Eventually, I might even be able to buy into the business. It's a chance for something more permanent, something we can build together." His sincerity convinced her, and Madeline agreed to look at the Dawson house the following weekend. When they visited, she was pleasantly surprised by the neat two-bedroom cottage with its small garden and covered porch. Though in need of some repairs and a thorough cleaning, it had good bones and a welcoming feel. "I can see us here," she said, standing in the front room and envisioning it with curtains, a bookshelf, perhaps a rocking chair by the fireplace. "It's perfect for starting out." Howard's arms encircled her from behind, and he rested his chin atop her head. "Home isn't a place," he murmured. "It's where we're together. But I'm glad you like it, because I've already spoken to Dawson's attorney about purchasing it." Madeline turned in his arms, surprised. "Purchasing, not renting." "I've saved most of my wages these past 5 years," Howard explained. "Mr. Thornton's been generous, and there's not much to spend money on at the ranch. I thought a home of our own would be a good investment in our future." The practicality and thoughtfulness of his planning moved Madeline deeply. This was a man who didn't just speak of love but demonstrated it through actions and consideration. "Our home," she said, testing the words and finding them perfect. "When can we move in?" "After the wedding," Howard replied, his eyes twinkling. "Mrs. Palmer would have my hide if I suggested anything else." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Madeline wrote to her aunt in Boston, sharing her happiness and extending an invitation that she knew would likely be declined due to the distance. Howard formally resigned from the Broken Arrow, though Mr. Thornton insisted he stay through the June roundup to train his replacement properly. Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Palmer collaborated on wedding arrangements with an enthusiasm that sometimes overwhelmed the bride-to-be. The entire town seemed involved in the celebration, with offers of flowers from gardens, music from the amateur town band, and enough promised food to feed half the county. "It's like they've all adopted us," Madeline commented to Howard one evening as they reviewed the growing guest list. "In a way they have," he replied. "That's the beauty of a place like San Andreas. When they accept you, they take you in completely." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect July morning. Madeline dressed in a new gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Palmer had helped her select from a catalog, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been Mrs. Wilkins's contribution. Her mother's locket completed the ensemble, a connection to her past as she stepped into her future. The small church was filled beyond capacity, with latecomers standing along the walls and children seated on the floor near the front. Wildflowers adorned every surface, their sweet fragrance filling the air. As Madeline walked down the aisle alone, a break from tradition that felt right in the absence of family, she saw only Howard, waiting for her with an expression of such reverent joy that tears threatened to blur her vision. The ceremony itself was brief, but heartfelt. They had written their own vows, simple declarations of love and commitment that reflected their journey from that fateful day in the desert to this moment of union. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Howard's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, drawing appreciative sighs from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward spilled from the church grounds into the town square, where tables had been set up under shady trees. There was music and dancing, feasting and laughter, and toasts that ranged from eloquent to humorously inappropriate. Mr. Thornton himself had ridden down from the high country for the occasion, presenting the newlyweds with a fine matched pair of riding horses as a wedding gift. "Every couple needs to be able to ride side by side," the ranch owner said gruffly. "These two will serve you well." As the sun began to set, casting the same golden light that had illuminated their first ride together from the desert, Howard took Madeline's hand and led her away from the festivities to a quiet corner of the square. "Happy?" he asked, his thumb gently stroking the new gold band on her finger. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "When I collapsed in that desert, I thought it was the end. Instead, it was just the beginning." Howard drew her into his arms, his eyes reflecting the sunset glow. "I'll never stop being grateful that I found you that day," he said softly. "Or that you chose to stay with San Andreas and with me." "There was never any real choice," Madeline murmured, reaching up to touch his cheek. "From the moment you shaded my body with your own until sunset, I think my heart knew where it belonged." Their kiss, witnessed only by the setting sun, sealed a promise that had begun in the harshest of circumstances, but would bloom in the fertile soil of love, respect, and shared purpose for all the days to come. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their hearts. Howard thrived at the newspaper, eventually becoming Mr. Fleming's partner, and expanding the publication to include more regional news and literary contributions. Madeline continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a son they named Thomas, after her father. She later returned to the classroom part-time, implementing progressive educational methods that earned the San Andreas School recognition throughout the county. Their home on the edge of town became a gathering place for friends, a haven for students in need of extra help or simply a quiet place to read, and the center of a family that grew to include two more children, a daughter, Eleanor, and another son, William. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Howard surprised Madeline with a special gift, a framed poem he had written about their first meeting, accompanied by a sketch of the desert landscape where he had found her. The final stanza read, "In that vast emptiness, I found my world beneath the cruel sun, discovered grace while shading you until the day unfurled into the night where stars revealed your face. What seemed mere chance was destiny, instead two souls meant to find shelter, heart to heart, against life's harshest trials, together led to build a love no desert could tear apart." Madeline kept the poem on her bedside table for the rest of her life, a reminder that sometimes the most unpromising circumstances could lead to the greatest blessings. What had begun as a desperate fight for survival beneath the merciless desert sun had blossomed into a love story that would be told in San Andreas for generations, to come the tale of the Eastern schoolteacher and the cowboy who had shaded her with his own body until sunset, and then illuminated her life forevermore with the light of his steadfast heart. In their golden years, with their children grown and grandchildren gathering at their knees, Howard and Madeline could often be found on their porch swing, watching the sunset together. And in those moments, as the California sky blazed with the same colors that had witnessed their beginning, they would hold hands in comfortable silence, secure in the knowledge that the journey that had started in desperation had led them to the richest kind of happiness, a shared life built on love, respect, and the daily choice to shelter each other, come what may.